Hello, this is Rob Lansing, former mayor of Lake Forest, and you are listening to the Lake Forest Podcast.
The Lake Forest Podcast is supported by viewers, listeners, and businesses just like you. Looking for the best pool supplies? Look no further than Dohany's Pool Supplies. With a history dating back to 1967, this family-owned business offers everything families need to keep their pools clean and sparkling, from chemicals to equipment. Plus, customers enjoy free shipping on all orders. Visit Dohany's Pool Supplies today at doheny.com, DOHENY.com, to learn more. Forest Bluff Real Estate Team serves Illinois, Wisconsin, Lake Forest, and Lake Bluff. John Josephitis, Laura Lee Van Fleet, and of course Michelle Parnell. Get a free market analysis now at forestbluffrealestate.com. For the best cannabis in the world, look no further than Iliad Epic Grow. Owned by Lake Bluff's own Rich Ruzich, they are a cannabis cultivation center focusing on hard-to-find small batch products that will delight both the occasional user and ganjier. When visiting Michigan, ask for it by name. Epic Products, exceptional process. For more information, email info@iliadgrow.com. Havey Communications has been helping first responders arrive safely since 1983. It's owned by Lake Forest's own Mike Havey. Check them out at haveycommunications.com. We'd also like to say we're thankful for our Patreon supporters, Otto, John C., Helen, and Herrick.
Mayor Lansing, thanks for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for what you do. It's important at all times to reach out to our community about the issues of the day and how things get done.
Well, a lot of people, don't thank us for our content, because I don't think they understand it. The discussions that we have here are just like if we're sitting in the bar and what people are talking about. Sometimes all people talk about are politics, or some people talk about a tent that's put up next to the coffee shop. So we're just sitting at the bar here having a Diet Coke and chatting about what's going on. Joe, when's the last time we saw Mayor Lansing? Didn't we see him, something going on with the caucus?
We saw him at the caucus meeting. We tried to do an interview, but the video didn't work out, unfortunately. So all your words of wisdom got lost
Still working
in there.
Gosh,
but that was
I
when
must
we
have
had
talked to you for 10 or 15 minutes.
Yeah, maybe we can dig out the. I think we have the audio, but not the video, because Pete was wandering around with his neon sign.
We're working on our production there.
You're getting there.
But you were very gracious to talk to us then, as you are today. You were, just as a background for our viewers, you were mayor from when to when?
What was it exactly? I think May of 2017 to May of 19. Yeah, and then George Pandolian.
You were the mayor before George Pandolian.
George followed me right into the storm of COVID, for which he someday will forgive me.
It's George's fault.
And what was your background before that? What, you had served on the city council and done some other stuff with the city before that?
Yeah. Actually, it's like Satchel Paige said, never look back, or whatever. Something might be gaining on you, but it's almost 40 years ago now. We moved here 42 years ago, and it was a couple of years later, I think, that I put my hand up to volunteer, be a citizen volunteer through the caucus selection process, and their wisdom was, well, here, we'll put them on the zoning board. And so I started there, and then off and on served on several boards and commissions of one kind or another, became an alderman, in the late 90s. I lose track of time. Then there was a bit of a gap. I got busy in my work and family life, and then was asked to put my hat in the ring, and I became mayor. And so all of my remarks, I would, when I talk about the city, and I think some of the things of interest today, I'm governed by, some might say handicapped by, but I am deeply governed by 40 years of getting to know the city and its long history of governance. And what I often, in my backhanded way, I say that the method to the madness that has created this community that so many of us love as our home and our haven, and for its consistent streetscapes and beauty and institutions and qualities of the way we do things. All but I would say unique in the United States when you package it all together. So I always like to talk about the caucus because for going on 90 years, they've been behind it.
Yeah, you've been pretty vocal about supporting the caucus system. I know during the election you had spoken at a couple of events for Randy Tack when he was running for mayor and obviously won the election. And you were at that caucus meeting that night to ratify the officers, and we're still very supportive of it. So why don't you talk about the caucus system, why you feel so strongly about it?
Well, it's very interesting, the Lake Forest version of a caucus system, which again, going on 90 years, has created so much of the value that we all hold for this community. And to be drilled down into that, I just don't want to breeze over that thought, is that I often ask newcomers to Lake Forest and folks who've been around a while, what are the 5 or 10 reasons why you moved here, or you like this community, or you love it? And you hear the usual list of things, and I touched on a few there a minute ago, but it's the consistent streetscapes, the quality of the planning, the institutions, the schools, and so forth. It goes on and on. And my point with asking all that is that life being what it is, and human beings being who they are, and human nature being what it is that I can assure you that absolutely none of these qualities occurred by act or operation of mere chance. They were planned and thought through and organized over many, many years. And I always will bring up the historical perspective, because Lake Forest was chartered as a city in 1861, and then I think it was 1871, had one of America's first town plans, the east side of Lake Forest with the curvilinear streets and the tree planting programs and all that, started so many years ago. In the 1920s, we had one of America's first zoning plans. This kind of new idea that there would be some thought given to the quality and the safety and welfare of living in residential buildings should be managed in an appropriate way, and then it continues multiplied since then, with Lake Forest being one of the first communities in this country to have a historic preservation ordinance and other ordinances, a robust, building codes and, bulk ordinances about houses that, old housing stock has to be torn down. You got to put new one up. Well, what are we doing here? What do we want for our community? And so forth. So that historical perspective all feeds into the issues of the day. Here in current times. But I must say that most everything that comes up in the community in terms of planning and zoning and how the city is organized and managed, and this just decade over decade attraction and retention of just amazing citizen volunteers who are exceptional in other aspects of their lives, but who give their time freely to help run and organize the city, and how that is just unparalleled, really. In the rest of the United States, and the work product of this has been is very evident. And in the middle of all of that is the caucus system, which encourages citizen volunteers to come forward, be interviewed, go through a process to determine their backgrounds and capabilities and characteristics appropriate for various boards and commissions and city offices, school boards, and so forth.
What's going on November 7th, guys?
Well, I did a little more homework, history. because none of this all happens by chance. It's really interesting, as happens in state legislatures and in the Congress. Every once in a while in courts, as they go back, what were the original intent of the, how we got here and so forth. So what was the original intent of the bylaws and whatnot? Well, I haven't read every one of them going back the many years, but it was, it's now about 70 years since they had the caucus has had a thoroughly written set of bylaws. And then I noticed in all that there have been 18 modifications or amendments to it over those 70 years. And so here we are on November 7th with an amendment to ensure the integrity of the work of the Lake Forest Caucus. And I think specifically what some people have brought up more than anything else is this. There had been put in some years ago, and I don't know when it was. I must say this provision has always sort of bothered me, having gone to caucus meetings over the years, as I think you have from one time or another. And frankly, on that cold, chilly November or April evening, and maybe raining outside, that maybe 20 people showed up. And this was the annual meeting of the caucus or the presentation of the candidates. And I thought it rather vulnerable that there was an affirmatory vote of whoever chose to show up at that one meeting to affirm a slate of candidates for city offices and so forth, when in the background, this is the reality of the caucus. The caucus is 36 people, 9 from each ward, plus 7 officers who had prior service on the caucus. They're elected from the 4 wards. They meet as a committee of the whole that represents a broad cross-section of our town. It's typically revolves plus or minus 50% men and women, and other ways you can slice and dice it. And they literally, in a typical cycle where they're picking candidates for city offices or interviewing and recommending candidates for city offices, there is in total, because they meet 2 or 3 times or 4 times a month, depending on the month of the year, is that you're talking about a few hundred hours of work done by citizen volunteers who've come forward without agenda or personal, issues of about the city, but to come to convene in this kind of community spirit, to find amongst the people who are volunteering, or to go seek out people and ask them to get involved, even more importantly sometimes, so that you get the best and the brightest available to nominate, as I say, for boards and commissions or for and so forth. So this takes place over several months. And the idea that all of this work done by this committee of the whole, this large group that represents a broad cross-section of the city, that depending on who exactly showed up, usually attendance of about 20 people or so, it could be voted up or down. And as a matter of procedure and process, it just is not right. I've always worried about it, but what I'm most worried about is that it puts at risk all the hard work of those volunteers who did their very damnedest to be sure they could do the best with what they had to present candidates representing what's in the best long-term interests of the city. So, as has been done before, it's an amendment that all this hard work, these X hundreds of hours that's gone into this, that in the case of city offices, the people then go through a regular election, city, county supervised city election, to affirm these people. And in the case of boards and commissions, one should never forget that the mayor ultimately has the right of approval of any appointment to the various boards and commissions. So it's not like, I mean, if someone said, well, gee, what do you mean? It's this 36 people, or, you know, and the officers, and what if they became an evil cabal? Who would ever check this? Well, the citizens get a chance to look at the city officers through the vote, the citywide vote, and the mayor, and often, of course, working closely with city council, which is the practice through the years. We confirm or approve or deny appointments to boards and commissions. I must say, I can't even recall them, but I think it's happened one or two times in my time with the city that the mayor did not approve someone who came forward through the caucus process.
So the upcoming vote, just for the background of our viewers who may not have been following it, just the upcoming vote on November 7th is the Caucus Preservation Act. And so it is an open meeting of the caucus. Any resident of any registered voter in Lake Forest can show up to Gorton Center. I forget the hours. I think it's between 4 and 8:30. So that's a 4.5 hour window. I'm not exactly sure. Yeah, I've got it in front of me here. So it's November 7th between 4 p.m. and 8:30 p.m. at Gorton Center. So if you're a registered voter in Lake Forest, you can show up in there, and it's kind of like almost an election day where you go to your polling place, except but you got that 4.5 hour window. But what's at stake is, and we've talked about this a little bit in the past couple of weeks on the show, is really to prevent the chaos and some of the challenges that were presented last year by, I mean, it's a fact we've talked about Prue Beidler, who had interviewed with the caucus, I believe, 3 times for mayor and was rejected 3 times. And when you go before the caucus, you sign a commitment that you're going to honor who they select. She chose not to do that, and then at the last minute, I believe, sent out a big email to her a huge list of people under the guise of the caucus is not slating any women for office, and got people there and got enough people to play. I call it pack the place. Where you just let's see who can get more people into the building for this, and got them to vote no. But the problem was there's nothing in the process then when they vote no what to do. I mean, do you go back to the 35 or whatever members of the caucus and make them revote? I mean, it was total chaos, and I think so. The caucus proceeded with having Randy Tack as the nominee, and then the voters spoke pretty loud and clear on election day in April that over. I think Ms. Beidler got less than 40% of the vote, if I'm not mistaken. So it was a pretty strong mandate.
Yeah, it was about 2 to 1.
In spite of $200,000 of campaign money and getting a former state senator to run her campaign and all this stuff. But
why was the door open to allow this to happen? I think it was 2016 they made the change to the bylaws. This podcast, Mayor, has been going on for several years. I started out on the caucus, and I tried to shed light on some things. For instance, like the bylaws were down for a period of months. And dealing with this issue, and it has come to roost with this wasted energy with the Prue Beidler situation. Do you have a thought on why they opened up this door?
History is important. My understanding is that this provision, this what I call a confirmatory vote of the people that show up on a chilly November night or whatever it is, was done in fairly recent years. I just, in the minutia of reading bylaws, I had noticed it some time ago, but I somewhere in asking questions about it, it was an attempt, I think misguided and poorly thought through, that, gee, can't we do something, since we've spent all this time with these candidates, to get more people to come to the annual meeting and the spring meeting? And I honestly think
what Prue did.
I remember there's a famous U.S. Supreme Court justice commenting on a very difficult case that had a lot to do with the very foundations of the Constitution. He said, the Constitution is now a suicide pact. Just because we don't have a provision in our bylaws about what happens if, as it was, a group of people came along, and I want to talk about that in a minute, but it came along and blew through a meeting and wipes all that work out for what, and so I think it's appropriate not to have it. It denies the thought and care, and I mean thought and care, that citizen volunteers have put forth to encourage people to come forward with this slate, and I don't view it as some gross and large, great alteration of the bylaws. My gosh, every democracy in human history is different, about everything about it, where and how candidates come forward. And gosh, we have parliaments, and we have, congresses, and we got all kinds of different things. There is no one right way to run a democracy, or to run an election for that matter, or to put bylaws for your caucus system together. There's a lot of human judgment that goes into it, 18 amendments to it in the last 70 years, and I think this is the 19th. But let me turn to, what happened. When was that? A year ago?
Yeah.
As happens, Abe Lincoln, our own Illinois Abe Lincoln, said, I can never remember it correctly. You can please all the people some of the time, and you can please, however it goes, but you can't please all the people all the time. So yes, when you sit on boards and commissions, you sit on city council, and when you're mayor, you almost rarely have complete unanimity about exactly how an issue or a policy should be, or like a zoning or planning thing should be approved, but you work through it, using the advice and counsel of experts and city staff and so forth. You talk about it, you let time do its thing. Sometimes the better answer comes out if you take some time, do it. And there are people and some groups of people who, individuals, really, in small groups of people who would like things to be different about something. It's our schools, or some zoning matters, or historic preservation. And there's some people concerned about some of the thoughts have been expressed about the evolution of the central business district over the next 2 or 3 decades. Nothing's static. You got to talk about these things. But none of those decisions, none of these things, and there was quite a block the box, with the Eltunian condominium. Sure, there's many different perspectives and points of view about that, but absolutely none of those issues, any one of those things I've mentioned, is somehow fundamentally undermine the organization and structure of the caucus, or how city government makes decisions or whatnot. No, it's all being done the same way. There is no dark, smoke-filled room. It's citizen volunteers who come to meetings once, even twice a week at the caucus, and do the hard work of finding the right candidate. So it's so I can understand if somebody is upset about some issues, saw a chance by intervening in this vote to maybe we could do this. And along the way, Prue, who my wife and I have known for 42 years, is one of the most likable, enjoyable people you could ever imagine. Also has strong feelings of, yes, women in politics and one thing or another. She I don't know how to say it. I think she was approached, and I think she allowed this to happen, where she became a candidate, and yes, then they went forward and spent a lot of money. But I'll just conclude.
They made us spend money too.
Yeah, well, yeah, but I have to say, for all the time and and effort we've all spent and thought through and evaluated that. And finally, the judgment of the city by 2-1 or whatever in the vote. There is not one aspect of Prue's being interviewed 3 times and 3 times others were selected. There's not one thing in there at all that was in any way personal or denigrating or inappropriate about those votes. And it was done with the same integrity and the same level of effort has been done for many decades by the caucus. And those who would say that Prue's decision to run was because of caucus failures, they had the wrong, people don't all agree about everything all the time. If somebody wants to run, you can run. I have no problem with that, but don't do it and sort of muddy the caucus for having made a bad mistake. There were reasons, and they were sound, and the integrity of the process was solid all the way. So that's really the whole story from here.
Mayor, some tweaks do need to be, I mean, we're talking 90 years. You got to do some tweaks. For instance, you have term limits there that could be good, that can be bad, because you have, let's just say a third and a third and a third. You have a third of the people leaving each year that kind of know what's going on, a third that's brand new that's coming in, and a third that sort of knows what's going on. It's almost
yeah. Well said.
So look, I've nitpicked. Look, we live in Lake Forest. It's a great place. Okay. So we hold ourselves to a higher standard. Okay. So if you don't like our observations, anybody listening, start your own podcast and you can do it as well. But, I was in the caucus for a couple of years. I had some ideas, some issues, and Mayor, I'm an acquired taste in my communication skills. Okay, let's just put it like
That's what my wife says about me.
But you have, for instance, in each ward, you have 9 people that represent the ward, right? No matter what the population is, it's 9. Do you got any thoughts on should there be a different way of looking at that? The reason why I bring it up is from what I witnessed myself. Again, you have a third and a third and a third, right? Rotating in. And the 46 that are in the room, you're probably lucky if you have 50% that are kind of passionate, that show up all the time. It's no secret. The reason why I bring it up is if you have a 50% rate of people participating, would it make more sense to have 4 or 5 for each ward, or adjusting for the population? Just curious your thoughts on that.
Well, I think you're drilling down to a kind of a very specific thing. It's a process that involves human beings, so it's subject to all kinds of frailties of one kind or another. But no, I think the 9 is appropriate. I might say just a little perspective that some have said that the caucus system is undemocratic, small d, undemocratic, and it's not the way of democracy. Again, there's no 2 democracies the same in the entire history of the world. It's not the way to do it. Well, what you just described to me shows something that's akin to just bare democracy, naked democracy, where you're asking people to come forward to be on the caucus, in large part based on their backgrounds and what they've done in life and their experiences and their judgment and their soundness and so forth, but who may or may not know the city that well. There's an awful lot of sort of recently arrived people often. So
like Joe.
And then you're only there for 3 years. So the first year you're figuring out the lay of the land. The second year you're getting into it, and the third year you're pretty good at it. But then you're
out.
Is to me, I've always thought how amazing it is that the caucus has been so productive in bringing forward good candidates inculcating the qualities of the city for now 9 decades. When you look at that process, that rotation of people coming on and going off, that is right on the edge of democracy. If ever there was sort of naked democracy, to me, that is it. And
yeah, I mean, we see other communities that
but
don't have the term limits, and you see what happened. I mean, look at Niles, where they had a mayor for 50 years, and he wound up. The only reason he was no longer the mayor was he got arrested one day by the FBI.
So,
I mean,
Joe, now you get me going here. Again, I've been doing this too long, and I majored in government and economics in college. And my father was a political reporter for many years, but I just so when I was on council, I became much more aware of state and county issues because Lake Forest, as much as we all think it is and maybe want it to be an island, but there's a bigger world out there, and the spears that get aimed at Lake Forest in terms of taxes and regulations that come from Springfield and from the county are really something to behold. And so on council, and then particularly as mayor, I remember old Howard Kerr, our mayor, when I first became an alderman, always said, we need to have foreign relations here in Lake Forest, because we really had operated pretty much on our own, but all this policy stuff was starting to kill us and raise our costs and all that from Springfield and from the county. And so I spent a lot of time with the Northwest Municipal Alliance and some of these other groups of municipalities that were trying to consider what's the best way to handle some of these issues and whatnot. And I'll tell you what you learn is that the vast majority, I'm talking like 80, 90% of the municipalities in this state are, well, 99% of them are two-party systems reflecting, the two major parties. And that through time, as you were suggesting there with Niles, is that one of the parties gets the upper hand. And I countlessly going to meetings met mayors who'd been mayors for 18, 25, 30 years who were on the state benefits plan and on the state retirement system. And it was, had this kind of sinecure of office that they were just never going to give up. And, you just had to pray that they were sort of doing the right things. Well, most municipalities in the state aren't in great shape with respect to how they planned and organized their pension benefits, and don't have the multitude of qualities that we have in Lake Forest. I need not elaborate on that, because all you got to do is drive around and see the difference. And so the caucus system is appropriate for a smaller town. I'm from New England. I'm a Connecticut Yankee. And they still have town meeting, which dates back to the 1700s, where the budget of the town, and a town, what's a town? It's 6,000, 11,000 people in some part of New England. Anybody can show up and vote the budget of the town, but there are, and people can run either through a two-party system or they have caucus forms of organization, but it's a big open meeting where everybody can vote. And I talk about democracy and things that get upended. It's really quite interesting. But so it's a very sort of open and transparent way to do it. But it's the whole community, and that's what the caucus is. It's the whole community. And what is not appropriate in smaller towns, the way I'm trying to describe this with too many words, is that at some point, having a two-party system, which seems to serve the United States fairly well historically, and at the state, at both the state and federal level, is that just the workings of two parties separately funded. They're trying to, get to office, and, you can go on, you can get paid as a public official. There's all these things, all these other reasons that get in there. though, ends up with campaigns basically trying to cleave neighbor one upon the other, and sort of inventing issues in neighborhoods, because you'd have, ward elections and you do all that. And I don't know. I think a lot of people have come together in community, in constructive community engagement over 9 decades, and done a heck of a fine job of looking for candidates who were without agenda or personal biases about one thing or another, to do the best for the long-term interests of Lake Forest. And as much as I said, a few minutes ago, that the caucus being its own edge or frailty or, pure kind of democracy, really, is that the selection of those caucus members is, a lot of it has to do with the background. So you have plenty of people who have been directors of HR, human resources, at companies or not-for-profits, people who have led organizations. We had the head of one of the nation's finest building engineering, construction engineering firms, based in Chicago, that was serving on boards and commissions. We have a couple of retired managing partners of law firms, really people with a lot of life skills and perspectives about how to do things. And these people are brought together in the caucus, serving without agenda, to find people of appropriate character and background to participate or to serve on boards and commissions or city offices. So when you say 50% of the caucus shows up, I don't think that happens that much. At least these days, I haven't noticed it. But I think there's a lot of
ask around
community effort to.
Here, I'm throwing shade on the caucus. Look, the alternative is whoever has the most money wins. So if we didn't have the caucus, Prue Beidler would be, well, no, Randy,
I don't know about
you wouldn't
that.
waste $1 on this thing. So we have the caucus.
I don't buy that. I don't think money had, well, we were outspent, so it didn't work. No, let me tell you something else about residential communities and haven. This is our haven. This is our place. I like to think that in all kinds of short-term, near-term ideas that people have, rather than the long-term interests of the community, we've kept a lot of that stuff at the city limits through the years. And I think people appreciate that. And one of the things that happens, and it's sometimes in the American history been called the silent majority. It's been, you see it in clubs, for example. 25 people show up at the annual meeting at the club, unless they're serving cocktails, and then you always get more free cocktails.
Maybe we need to serve cocktails at every meeting.
Yes, exactly. Free cocktails.
There we go.
But you poke that bear. You poke that silent majority that pays their taxes, votes, occasionally goes to a meeting. When I was mayor, there were all kinds of people that made a point of coming forward to meet me. They wanted to talk to me about something. There's a lot of people that are generally aware, but what they're not going to do because of their private lives, their other calls on their time, is they're not very evident and vocal. But you poke that bear, that silent majority, and that's what happened. And in one sense, I wasn't surprised, but I thought it a wonderful affirmation of people understanding and agreeing how good they've got it here in Lake Forest. And okay, yes, I understand some individuals don't like this decision of the planning commission and over here and over there. Or they didn't like that decision of city council. I get all that. But in the main here is so much better than almost anything else you'll find in the rest of the country. And that's my job, by the way. I've been in 40 years now. And real estate investment. My job, I often say, is really to go around and evaluate the suitability of communities for investment, one kind of real estate or another. And it involves virtually every state in the country. And I've been doing this for 40 years. Guys, you can't count. I don't think there are 5 other communities that can stand alongside us for the whole package, everything. And none of it is perfect. None of it's perfect.
Mayor, you're a real estate guy. If you're at a negotiation and everybody's happy, something's not right. Unless you're dealing with school board contracts.
I think I don't want to speak for the mayor, but I think he wants to stay out of the school issues, unless he wants to dive into the school issues.
I've never been on the school board, and that's its own world of, I like to see more and more parental engagement. That's great. But,
well, you're a Connecticut guy, and the term pub came from public house. And like you said, everybody got together over a pint and you would discuss issues. And that's kind of where the theme of this podcast is from. This is what people are talking about. This is what's going on. Another thing that's talking about November 7th is, they call it a vote. And when people see vote, they're looking for choices. And when you have a caucus system, the choices have already been made out for you. You just have to check the box. Do you want to address that at all, Mayor?
Well, I think for a very long period of time, no doubt, that to amend the bylaws of the caucus requires a 2/3 vote of those who show up at a meeting. So here we go. Somebody wants to hijack this, or a group of people want to hijack it. They'll want to, but I would take a moment here to appeal to those who listen for themselves and to contact many, many others. It's a time to turn to and cast a vote for this, in my view, is a modest amendment to the hard work of the caucus. So you're right. I mean, vote and a choice, but it's really a provision that I think is very fair in the way that we like to conduct things in this country, which is that it requires 2/3 to change the rules.
You're also affirming the executive officers for next year, which means that whoever the vice president is turns into the president, and then they pick their own committee and they put it on a card and they say, you're voting for the executive committee. You're not voting, you're affirming. So I think it should be affirm, not vote.
Well, there's some wordsmithing there. That's an interesting question, that you asked, because, in part, maybe it goes back to, I'm sure on some nights, 50% of the people show up, out of the, my gosh, I don't even know how many meetings. There's probably 30 to 50 meetings that you have to do all this. And for a committee of the whole, can't all get together all the time. So the question is, who should be the leader for the next year, the president for the next year? Should that be, an all hands vote of unengaged citizens, or should it be the body that
unengaged caucus members?
I guess you would say this, somewhat self-selecting in the sense that those in the caucus who recognize those who have been engaged, put the time in, are studious about what they do, and they're planners and organized, and they have leadership skills, well, they should be our leaders for next year. That's what that's all about. So to have some separate overlay of some kind of election from some other group. So I often say, guys, this whole matter of the few people that show up at the annual meeting, and, our registered voter turnout isn't even that great in Lake Forest, although it's terrible across America, is that particularly here in Lake Forest, because I will state, and I'll defend it if anybody wants to sit for an hour, is that we are a well-run community. The record is plain. It's been going on for a long period of time, and you get one direct result that's been evident for many, many, many years, which is a lot of people say, this is pretty good. I don't need to go up to City Hall. and get involved.
You talked about silent majority, and there is an element of when people cast their vote. Many people are casting a vote by not voting because they're saying I'm happy. I don't feel the need to go to vote because I'm happy with what's going on. And you look at places. Chicago just threw their mayor out. Lori Lightfoot lost. Other the last presidential election, the president lost. People march to the polls when they're not happy, and usually turnout is lower when people are happy. So there is, look, I voted in every election since I turned 18, but that's because that's how I was raised and taught that. But most people don't think that way. But they don't, but people vote by not voting sometimes, right?
Yeah. Yes, but there's also, you got human nature in there, and people run to the fire or run to the problem or the noise, and people like their quiet enjoyment. There's a real estate expression. The quiet enjoyment of their life in Lake Forest, and as a result, there are not that many people who are engaged with what you would call, the governance of Lake Forest. There's a lot of participation in total in all the institutions and organizations we have, certainly if you include the schools and all their committees and everything. So we're a very engaged town, but it's not like you get, 70% voter turnout. We struggle to get 20 to 30 or 40%, depending on the year and whatnot, but that's pretty typical of America. The caucus sponsoring the officers, selecting the officers, is it in this kind of lower engagement kind of community where, because of good governance, I contend, a lot of people aren't engaged in studying the budgets and doing all the details that really a lot of smart people spend a lot of time on, is that the caucus knows who the right people are to lead it for the next year. So it's from one to the other. And if people want to get engaged, have an issue about something, want to talk about it, there's so many avenues to do that. Come before council, call your council member, call the mayor, volunteer for the caucus, volunteer to serve on a board or commission that you have some questions about. There's no prohibition. I think a lot of the people that came forward last year who were frustrated about one thing or another, well, I don't know. A lot of these people I've never seen on a board or commission or whatever. So,
Mayor, would you
agree? You talked about, you raised your hand when you first moved here. You said a year or two after you moved here, you said, "Hey, I'd like to get involved." Right? I mean, it's pretty much they're begging at times. I've been to a couple of caucus meetings now, and they're begging for volunteers. So if you come in and you can set aside the time and don't have a destructive agenda, I think you're in somewhere into the caucus, right? It's pretty much an open door.
Absolutely. If you don't have sharp edges and grinding, and
we keep saying agenda.
There's place for it.
We keep saying agenda. Maybe we should say bias, because this is an HR position and you're doing a lot of interviewing. And Mayor, would you agree or disagree that if you're going to get into this caucus position, there must be some type of regiments where you have to, if you've never interviewed before and you're going to be part of that process, you should be taught some skills on how to interview. Do you agree or disagree on that?
Well, I think in my experience with the caucus, they've always asked me a lot of good questions, but I think there's enough people in that room who, through the internal meetings and discussions and whatnot of the caucus, who help others learn more about it. But we want everybody, all types of people, to be on the caucus. It's just amazing who we are also the quality of people we're able to get. But there's also people who work at home or have self-employed. I mean, there's all kinds of people.
Well, there's definitely passionate people, but you also have the people that are trying to fill up their resume with the position, and you just kind of have to, what I'm talking about. You don't have to say yes or no, but it is going on out there. And that's kind of where I'm getting back to. Do you need 9 for each ward? Like, why is it 9?
I never met anybody, to be honest with you, who I thought was padding. It's hard work. You got to show up all those times. And you might know some of these people. So you're interviewing 5 people for the Plan Commission. Well, geez, we lose plenty of people because, there's a whole slice of humanity that doesn't ever want to be publicly visible as being for or against an individual for a certain activity. So
that is rough.
Yeah. So it's hard. And it's like, I would say, like, as is often said about democracy in general, I suppose you could say it about the caucus system. It is the worst form of organization to source candidates for governance, except for all the others. It's just,
nobody wants to see the sausage being made. Look, it's the best that we got. And all I'm saying, Mayor, is a couple tweaks here and there from what I've personally seen. And, autopsy without blame. And so we don't have to have this wasted energy, right?
Yeah. Well, I hear you. There's a lot of education. I've always said, when you're an alderman or serving on some of these boards we have, and certainly as mayor, I'm not exaggerating. I mean it. 90% of the job is educating folks about the method to the madness, about how we got here. And to use another old expression, so many, an extraordinarily high percentage of the issues that come forward from time to time that have notice or some heat involved with them is really old wine in new bottles. It's been there, done that. There's a way the city handles a planning issue, or how we go about the planning and organizing of the sewer maintenance and sewer replacements. Everything's got a process, and it's been thought about. And a lot of sound people for over many years have thought about it, and we're very conscious of precedent in the city. And that's one of the reasons at both the staff level and at the boards and commissions level, because that's that kind of predictability, that kind of, you can count on Lake Forest doing the right thing for the long-term interests of Lake Foresters, is the foundation. It's the underpinning of your home value and of the qualities of the overall community. So,
can I poke you one more time, Mayor?
Well, I don't know. I haven't had lunch yet, so be careful.
I like to quote one of our old hosts of the show, Art Miller. Lake Forest is filled with a bunch of people that know that they're right. The HPC, the 17 standards, do you think we need 17 standards, or do you think we need to whittle that down a little bit? You can say no comment.
Well, I'm generally going to say no comment because I haven't had lunch yet. But a lot of people spent a lot of years sorting through the standards, and I'll tell you one thing: if you go, you identified every community that has something they call the historic preservation thing, you'd hardly recognize it from one to the other, because the differences lie on it's human nature. There's so many different views and opinions that come into all that, and it's one of on the margins of it, of any policy, of regulatory policy of one kind or another. A room full of reasonable people can reasonably disagree at all times. But it's out of that firmament or infirmament that gets people thinking about it, and with time and getting the facts right and thinking about the long term. Is this going to be a good idea 20, 40, 50 years from now? How that all needs to play itself out and these decisions are made. It's 17 now. I'm no expert about how it got to 17, but
it makes you feel better. Even Mayor George said he would cut it down.
Okay, well, George, that's George's opinion.
Okay.
I have no.
He had one.
I haven't studied it, frankly, in a long time.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So no comment. Okay, I got it. Joe, you got anything else for Mayor Lansing?
No, I just going to say we really appreciate your time today. I think the couple issues that the city is going to be facing in the next few years. I think the biggest one, maybe it doesn't come out in community surveys as being a big issue, but it's something that's going to probably take a lot of the mayor and council's time over the next few years, is the redevelopment or potential redevelopment of the central business district. What's your thoughts? You're a real estate guy. What's your thoughts on what Lake Forest should do?
Well, geez, that's a short topic. I have several perspectives. I live right next to the village too, so I've got a lot of thought into this, and my office is downtown. So when first, I suppose right in the first, at the top of a discussion about the central business district, and I was on a couple of central business district commissions going back through the years, and we had all kinds of zoning things, so on. So I'm quite familiar with it. But I think first and foremost, this is a residential community. And the people who come to the polls to vote the city officers primarily want a village shopping experience. And then, call it a community center, one form or another. And I remember we had, at one point, there was a great hue and cry. The Chamber of Commerce was very involved and so forth, that we needed more parking. The answer to Lake Forest is if we had more parking, our stores could do better and we'd have more stores and all that. Well, there's some bigger structural issues. We're pasted up against the lake. We're not at a crossroads. And Lake Forest is not immune to every national retail trend you can think of. That's why we don't have a hardware store. Or, there's a lot of reasons. So, but when it came to that parking question, I always felt, if you're going to build a two-story garage, well, why not 3 or 4? Well, let's think this all through. What are we doing here? First of all, because we're up against the lake and we're not really at a well-accessed crossroads and that sort of thing, is that we have plenty of traffic data about Green Bay Road and Deer Path, Wesley, and all that shows that at prime hours, 8:30 with the schools and everything, that those are not great, traffic signal ratings that we have, in the sense that the traffic backups, in other words, you have to wait 2 or 3 or 4 light cycles to get through it sometimes. So having more parking and attracting more people is really not the answer, because the people who vote the council and who pay the taxes here in the main are the residents who want a village shopping experience, and not frankly a version of a fairly blown up Highland Park, just to name one community. Now, so when that was coming up, I personally went around and surveyed, well, who owns these buildings? And this goes back now 20 years, so some of this has changed, but who owns these buildings where these retail establishments are, and who owns these stores, and where do they live? And it was a clear majority of both the buildings and the retail establishments were owned by people from outside of Lake Forest. So my whole response to the what should the future of downtown Lake Forest be, or whatever? Well, it's what the residents want. And and who are we doing this for? It's only them, and not these sort of outside interests. And I must say, I see that. You and I have all been to town, wonderful places around this country where they're just being overrun, where the cruise ships are coming in or whatever. And I think the city fathers need to somehow, call a timeout and say, well, just who are we doing this for? Because the residents are getting overrun by these crowds, and yet all that retail, it's all owned by
electric scooters.
Yeah, it's just everything. So anyway, second thought. That's my thought. It's about a village shopping experience and kind of a community gathering place. That's the scale and intensity that I think is appropriate going forward. Now, we've also, Lake Forest did an excellent job, like most suburban communities in America, after World War II, to keep that. And tongue in cheek, I say to keep out that damnable multifamily housing. And boy, were we good at it. You know, we kept it all out. But the big demographic worm turned over, which was that, of course, for some years now, and going for another 30 years or so, we've got this aging population cohort that wants age-appropriate housing, and scaling down and so forth. And there's just a real shortage of it. So I'm in favor of some measured steps towards providing more residential, but doing it within the context of Lake Forest, the 3-story, part of a block here and part of a block there, or whatever. By the way, that helps the restaurants. And boy, did COVID, like, there's no town that's gotten as many great restaurants as they have recently for a whole bunch of reasons. And COVID probably had a lot to do with it. But, and then just picking apart the way the question was stated to me, I can assure you that there is absolutely nothing that's going to happen quickly, of any great scale, of any revolutionary nature, over many, many, many years downtown. We're talking glacial evolution. It's just not going to happen very fast. But should it change a little bit? Yeah. First of all, you've got buildings that are worn out. The building our office is in was built in 1906, and every time the express train goes through here, there's quite a vibration in this building. So some buildings run out of their useful lives. And
what about the
and then
HBC
also
then?
lifestyles. People want different services and things and so forth, but that doesn't mean, no, we're not going to become 5 stories, and we're not going to have 4-story parking decks and all that. And then again, on the margins, you get in historic preservation. There are those who have a very sort of comprehensive and total view, and that's their passion about it. And nothing, seemingly almost nothing should be changed. Well, I don't know. It's the community, the voters, and the residents of this town who vote, the council, the city's officers, who influence all of that through caucus participation and so forth. It's up for them to decide, and it will happen very slowly.
Mayor Lansing, thank you so much for coming on the Lake Forest podcast.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. You do a great service for the community. Thanks much.
Depends who you ask.
We'll see you at the caucus meeting on November 7th at Gordon Center between 4 and 8:30.
I'll see you
Mayor
at the
Lansing will be
Affirmation.
signing autographs in the lobby for.
And about 150 of my closest friends will be there too. With me.
Pete will bring the cocktails.
Politics only matters when it affects you. Take care, gentlemen.
Yeah, all
Thank
the
you,
best.
Mayor.
All right, bye-bye. The Lake Forest podcast is supported by viewers, listeners, and businesses just like you. Looking for the best pool supplies? Look no further than Dohany's Pool Supplies. With a history dating back to 1967, this family-owned business offers everything families need to keep their pools clean and sparkling, from chemicals to equipment. Plus, customers enjoy free shipping on all orders. Visit Dohany's Pool Supplies today at doheny.com, DOHENY.com, to learn more. Forest Bluff Real Estate Team serves Illinois, Wisconsin, Lake Forest, and Lake Bluff. John Josephitis, Laura Lee Van Fleet, and of course Michelle Parnell. Get a free market analysis now at forestbluffrealestate.com. For the best cannabis in the world, look no further than Iliad Epic Grow. Owned by Lake Bluff's own Rich Ruzich, they are a cannabis cultivation center focusing on hard-to-find small batch products that will delight both the occasional user and ganjier. When visiting Michigan, ask for it by name. Epic Products, exceptional process. For more information, email info@iliadgrow.com. Havey Communications has been helping first responders arrive safely since 1983. It's owned by Lake Forest's own Mike Havey. Check them out at haveycommunications.com. We'd also like to say we're thankful for our Patreon supporters, Otto, John C., Helen, and Herrick.